Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hakureja Rave, and I'm here with my recap and review of the Gilded Age Season number 2, Episode number 3, which is titled Head to Head. And why is this show so good? Why is it? I want 2 episodes a week. With Turner showing up in the previous episode as the wife of a very, very rich old man. I was looking forward to seeing how episode number 3 will have George and Bertha try to handle that situation. And yeah, Bertha is like, hey, it is what it is. We need I think his name is Mr. Winthrop, right? Or Winterton, whatever. But we need Mr. Winter on our side because he's very, very rich. He has connections with the old society people as well as the new ones. We need his vote. And if that means being respectful to his wife, Miss Turner, I'll do it. And of course, George, he trusts his wife, but he's also a bit worried because of what happened between him and Turner, because Bertha doesn't know that. And you just know that that's gonna come on out. Ada is peeping at the Russell house from her window, and she's like, oh, look, there's a whole lot of people coming over there. And she's like, Agnes, don't you miss parties? And Agnes is like, not really. But yeah, what are you planning? And Ada is like, well, I was thinking that we should call over the Reverend again for luncheon. And yeah, you can really see that Ada has a crush on she has a crush on the Reverend Mr. Forte, and I don't blame her. I want her to be happy, but Agnes, no. Agnes wants things to be the way they are. And she's like, well, you know what? The fact that you're feeling kind enough and everything when it comes to inviting the Reverend, I do need your help. And Ada is like, what do you need my help with? So it turns out that cousin Dershel ended up writing to Agnes. He has a crush on Marion, and he wants the ants to help him court Marion. And I'm like, I'm okay with it. Now, I know that there are people in the fandom who want Larry and Marion to be a thing, but I don't see it. I really don't. I would rather have Marion be with Mr. Dershel, even though he's older. He looks respectful. He seems to genuinely like Marion, and yeah, let's see where this goes. Turner arrives as Mrs. Joshua Winterton, and of course the help is very, very surprised to see her, even though Bertha warned Church about one of her guests surprising him. The fact that it's Turner really, really surprises him, and Adelaide is very surprised too, and she basically runs down to the kitchen to tell everyone else. Watson is like, Joshua Winterton is a very rich man, and the chef is like, how do you know? And Watson is like, well, I read the paper, and I'm like, well, it's also because you were rich, you used to be rich. And of course, you used to know people. But yeah, Adelaide is very, very excited, and George is like, you know what? It's better that you don't go upstairs. I'll handle everything. Miss Fish is at the party too, and she asks Bertha to come talk to her. So while that's happening, George and Mr. McAllister ended up having a little conversation, and Allister is like, well, Mr. Russell, your wife is, she's up to something, and the cause that she's fighting for, it is disrupting New York society. And I just hope that it's for a good cause. And George is like, you know what, Mr. Allister? Whatever cause my wife sides with, it's a good cause. And he is so supportive of Bertha, and I'm like, oh. Bertha ended up having this little shindig because she needs to make an announcement. And the announcement is that the Met will open on the same date as the Academy. I think it's the 22nd of October. So basically, Bertha wants the Met supporters and the Academy supporters to actually fight, and they are actually now forced to pick a side. And of course, that's gonna cause scandal in the society. Marion comes back from school. She was a bit late because she was helping rearrange the classroom, and Agnes is like, oh, so you're moving furniture now. But yeah, Aurora is there, and while they may wait for Miss Astor, Linda, Aurora is like, well, there's this display being held by Oscar Wilde, and I would like to invite Marion if she's interested. And Marion's like, yeah, sure. Oscar is invited too, and Miss Maud will be there. Miss Maud being the new character from Patty, I guess, that we met in the previous episode. And she basically tells Agnes that Oscar has eyes on Miss Maud, and Agnes like, okay, so who is Miss Maud? Do we know her? And it turns out that they kind of know her. And Agnes is like, you know what? As long as she's rich, I'm okay with it. And Aurora is like, yep, she is rich. And Ada is like, well, shouldn't you kind of let Oscar decide? And Agnes is like, when the heck have I ever done that? It's time for Alistair to leave the party because he also has to attend the little group meeting that's happening right across the street. He is stuck, and he's like, you know what? You're kind of asking for trouble, aren't you, Mrs. Russell? Because now, Mrs. Russell, well, I'm asking for something. I'm asking for people to pick a side. So what will you do, Mr. Alistair? Will you pick the side of the Academy, or will you pick the side of the Met? And Alistair is really, really in a tough situation, and I would be like, if I was Alistair, I would lie about being sick or something, or I'll just go overseas. Alistair arrives, and this is where he's like, you know what, I've got some tea. And they're like, okay, pour it. So Alistair is like, I just heard. And I'm like, you really heard? You were literally at the party, Alistair. But yeah, he's like, I just heard that the Met is gonna open on the same date as the Academy. And yeah, it's gonna be head to head. And Linda doesn't like that at all, because Linda was like, you know what, in a way, I never thought that Mrs. Russell would had such a fight in her. And it's like, well, I think you didn't expect her to fight you. And Linda's like, well, kind of, especially because when it comes to the status that she currently has in society, I helped her be there. And yeah, so this is where Linda is like, well, I need your help. And I was like, what the heck, what the heck do you need me to do? And Linda's like, I need you to write to the old members and tell them just a rumor, because I can't say that because then it will become official, but I want them just to have, listen to this rumor that if any of the old members end up accepting a seat or a box at the Met, they might end up losing their box in the Academy. And Agnes like, yep, I'll get right to it. Miss Scott will write those letters. And Aurora is like, you know what? I need to leave before you guys end up handing out weapons. Downstairs, the staff is talking about the drama between the Academy and the Met, and how Agnes will be writing letters to the old members, and how Miss Scott will be writing those letters. And Mr. Armstrong is like, how is Miss Scott going to write those letters? She can't write to that sort of people. And I'm like, Armstrong, just let it be. We have this conversation between these two people about how the strike thing is escalating, and George is like, you know what, I need to talk to this Mr. I think his name is Burnswick. Yeah, I need to talk to this Mr. Burnswick. I'll invite him over to my house. And then it finally happened, the interaction between Bertha and Turner. And before Turner comes up to Bertha to talk to her, Miss Fish kind of tells Bertha about how important Miss Turner is right now, because her husband has a lot of connections over in England, especially with the Duke. So she needs her. Now, the little interaction between Bertha and Turner, it was so good, because Mrs. Fish is like, will you be supporting the Met? And Turner's like, well, it's just that I knew this woman before who was very eager to get a box in the Academy, so if I end up supporting the Met, I think that I'll be being disloyal to her memory and all of that stuff. And you can tell that Turner is trying to take jabs at Bertha, and Bertha is, she takes everything in her stride, because Bertha knows that she kind of has an upper hand on Miss Turner, especially because Miss Turner was a lady's maid. She was her lady's maid, and Miss Turner wouldn't want her husband or the rest of society to know that. And this is where Turner is like, well, what if I don't side with you? What then? Are you gonna expose me? And Bertha is like, I didn't say that, but I'm just saying that you should consider siding with me. And Turner is like, you know what? Have you discussed this with George before you decide what you want to do with me? Bertha's like, George, Mr. Russell, what's he got to do with it? And Mr. Turner's like, well, considering what happened between us and the reason that I thought that I was sacked, why don't you talk to him? And I'm like, ooh, Turner said it. Turner revealed it, that something happened between her and George. And of course, Bertha is distraught, and she is gonna bring that up in front of George. And then we have this scene after the party down in the kitchens, where the staff is finally like relaxing, meeting, and we get to know that this guy, I think his name is Peter, so he ended up being in contact with Turner, and he's the one who tells everyone how Turner ended up basically hooking up with Mr. Winterton, about how she wrote a letter to him complimenting his culture, his wisdom, and all of that stuff. And then both of them met, and everyone is like, what? That's what it took? A letter and one meeting? And Peter is like, well, it took more than that, but yeah, she's now Mrs. Winterton, and welcome to America, where you can be whatever you want to be. Over at Peggy's workplace, we find out that Mr. Fortune has this little story that he wants to work with, with how Mr. Booker T. Washington is opening a dormitory at one of the schools over in Tuskegee, and how he wants it to be covered and all of that stuff. And Peggy's like, I would like to go, and I'm like, ooh, going down south over in Alabama, ooh, Peggy, that's gonna be tough, but I'm looking forward to seeing how the Gilded Age handles all of that stuff. Now, Mr. Fortune isn't really interested in having Peggy tag along, but Peggy isn't gonna take no for an answer. I also like this scene between Fortune and Peggy, where Mr. Fortune is like, you know what, even though both of us are black, our history is very, very different. Our upbringing is different because he was a slave, while Peggy hasn't experienced such a life, and Peggy doesn't necessarily know what goes down in the South. But still, Peggy is like, hey, all I know is that I love it when people of color end up opening doors for others, and this is gonna be great. Even though it's a small first step, it's still a first step. So please let me come with you. I want to cover this story. Then we have the scene between Larry and Miss Blaine, where these two are still hooking up with each other, and Miss Blaine is like, aren't you kind of worried what other people are gonna say? And Larry is like, you know what, I don't care, I want to be with you, I like doing this, so yeah, I'm still gonna hook up with you. And he's like, and also Larry does bring up the fact that aren't you worried about what the servants are gonna say? And Miss Blaine is like, no, there's nothing to worry about, the servants won't say anything. And also she mentions about how she's going to make a trip over to New York. And Larry is like, yeah, when you come on over there, let's hook up again. And dun dun dun, it happens. Bertha walks into Russell's office, and she's like, George, we need to talk. It's about Miss Turner. George's like, what did she tell you? And Bertha's like, she told me everything. She told me that something happened between you two, and that was kind of the reason that she got sacked. So tell me the truth, George. Finally, tell me the truth. And George is like, Bertha, I need you to understand that yes, she came into my bed. She was in my bed, naked. I turned on the lamp. I realized that it wasn't you, so I asked her to get out. And that's it. Nothing actually happened between us. And Bertha's like, so you, after everything that happened, you decided to keep everything under the rug. You ended up having me be dressed and bathed and get ready with the help of a woman that was naked in your bed. How could you do that, George? And George is like, hey, I saw that you liked her, that you needed her, and I didn't want to disrupt the household dynamic, how it worked and everything, so it was a mistake. And Bertha's like, no, it wasn't a mistake, George. It was betrayal. And she storms off. And I'm like, I can understand where she's coming from. Ends up having a conversation with his son-in-law, and this is where he ends up providing a bit more about his backstory, about how he went bankrupt, and then his in-laws made him file for divorce, and then Flora, I think her name is Flora, right? Flora was born, but he wasn't able to be in contact with her, and he could never ever get back into banking because he was bankrupt, so he decided to become a valet. And his son-in-law understands that, but his son-in-law is like, you know what, I have a proposition for you. Because George wants that Mr. Brunswick guy to come on over, he needs Bertha. So he walks into the room, even though Bertha isn't talking to him. He's like, Bertha, Mr. Brunswick is gonna be coming over. I need you to roll the red carpet for him. I need you to do this. And even though we have a falling out, my business has to, like, it doesn't stop. So Bertha, I need you here. And he tries to apologize, but Bertha isn't really in the mood to listen to his apologies right now. There's a knock on the door. Their daughter, Gladys, comes in, and Gladys is like, I can come back later. And Bertha is like, just spit it out. What's up? And Gladys is like, well, I was invited, me and Larry were invited to attend this show by Oscar Wilde, so I'll be going, and John will be accompanying me. And Bertha's like, yeah, okay, go. Watson decides to talk to Church because he needs advice about considering the proposal that his son-in-law provided him. So it turns out that his son-in-law wants Watson to travel all the way to San Fran. He will be looked after. He will be staying in an apartment that's already paid for. He'll have a manservant, a cook, and everything. However, the catch is that he will never ever decide to have actual contact with Flora or any of their children, and the son-in-law wants him out of Flora's life, and Watson understands that, but Watson doesn't want to do that. And as far as being updated about Flora's life, his son-in-law will keep him in the know. And even though this offer is generous, Watson is like, well, it is kind of heartless. So it turns out that the guy that Russell was going to meet, his name is Mr. Henderson, not Bushwick or whatever. But yeah, Henderson comes in and he's a bit anxious about meeting George because he's a very, very rich man, and Henderson has never seen a house like this. And he's also impressed by Bertha and how she looks and everything, because again, Mr. Henderson, his wife and him, they don't live such a life. Peggy ends up telling Marion that she'll be going out to cover the story with Mr. Fortune, and Marion is like, well, I am happy for you, but just be careful because Mr. Fortune is a married man and you'll be traveling all the way south with a married man all alone. And Peggy is like, hey, it's just professional and blah blah blah. And Marion's like, okay, if you say so, just be careful. During their conversation over lunch, this is where we get to know that Mr. Henderson's wife also works, because they both have to work to make ends meet. And that's also one of the reasons that Mr. Henderson is so passionate about striking, because he wants the lives of the labor workers to be better. We cut to the party or the lunch that Ada wanted the reverends to attend, and this is where they talk about cousin Dershel is there too, and Dershel is just like, hey, my little daughter, she always sings praises for Marion. According to her, Marion is the best teacher, and if she could have it, Marion would be teaching her every subject. And then the reverend is like, oh, Marion, you teach watercolors, right? And Marion is like, yeah, I do. And Reverend is like, amazing, I love watercolors. And Ada is like, I love watercolors too. And I was like, really, Ada? I've never heard you say that. And Ada's like, well, I know that you were trying to catch me on something, but if you need to know, I do know about certain watercolor artists, and she names them. And one of the names that she speaks is also who is an artist who the Reverend is also a fan of. So yeah, these two continue having a connection. And then there's this scene where the staff ends up presenting them with soup, and Agnes is like, what the heck is this? And this is where Ada explains that I remembered how the Reverend was looking for an authentic clam chowder, so I worked with the cook and the staff downstairs. We went through a couple of recipes, and I hope that he likes this soup. This was a little surprise for him, and the Reverend really appreciates that. And Agnes is just sitting there, and I think she's thinking like, what's up with the world? What's happening? Now, during this conversation, there's also a little scene between Aurora and Oscar, where Aurora tells Oscar about Oscar Wilde and how she's excited to see the show and that Maud will be there too. Then we have this entire conversation between Mr. Henderson and George, where Henderson is like, hey, George, I need you to increase the wages. I need you to better the working conditions. And George is like, no, I can't increase the wages. If I increase the wages, it will disrupt the market. It will cause a commotion. And basically, these two continue fighting when it comes to the importance of having a union and a strike and all of that stuff. And George, considering the type of guy he is, he kind of tries to bribe or buy Henderson. He's like, okay, tell me this. What if I end up offering you a management position? You'll get better pay, you'll get a better living, and your wife doesn't even have to work no more. And it turns out that no, Henderson can't be bought. And Henderson's like, no, I think you have a wrong idea of me. I am not backing down. And George is like, well, I ain't backing down either. Watson ends up having a conversation with her too about the offer that his son-in-law made, and she's like, you know what, even if you decide to go away, just remember that you will always be her father. That's something that no one can take away from you. George comes down after Mr. Henderson leaves, and then the staff kind of talk about the unions because they're like, okay, so what if someone starts a kitchen union, a kitchen worker union? Would you be interested in joining, Mr. George? And Mr. George is like, no, never. George comes to meet Bertha and he's like, thank you for today. And Bertha is like, it is what it is, George. I'm still mad at you. And George is like, okay, so when it comes to having dinner and everything, are you gonna have dinner with me? And Bertha is like, no, I'll have dinner in my room. And George is like, what about the kids? And Bertha is like, no, this quarrel is between us. We don't have to bring the kids in. And besides, the kids will be busy tonight with that stage play. So enjoy having dinner on your own. So Bertha walks away and George stops her. And George is like, Bertha, please at least give me a chance to make it up to you. And Bertha doesn't say anything, and she is emotionally devastated. We cut to everyone watching Oscar Wilde's play, and it is boring as heck. I mean, even Marion thinks it's boring, and if even Marion, like someone like Marion, can't even come up with something good to say about something you do, oh, it's bad. There's the little scene between Larry and Mrs. Blaine where Larry is like, can I take you home? And Mrs. Blaine is like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, these two are horny. Cutting to Marian and Dershel. Dershel is feeling some sort of way, especially because of what Francis is going through. And Maria's like, what's up? What's happening? And Dershel is like, well, as you know, the school is having this mother-daughter tea thing, and Francis is being emotional because her mother died and all of that stuff, and I don't know how to help her. Even though I'm a single father, I'm trying to give her the love that she needs, but I'm falling short. And Marian is like, you know what, Dershel, don't worry about it. If you please, then if you want it, I'll end up accompanying Francis to the Mother Tea party thing. I wouldn't mind. And Dershel's like, you would do that for her? And Maria's like, yeah, sure. And Dershel's like, well, I'm in your debt twice now. First with the tennis thing, and now this. And I'm like, just get married, propose to her. Mr. Oscar Wilde ends up making his debut in the Gilded Age, and you can tell that he's very, very flamboyant in a way, and he is who he is. And his Gerdar, oh, he picks up on Oscar and John being queer too. Talking about John, Oscar is like, hey, so you ended up accompanying Miss Gladys, I see. And he's like, yeah, just as friends. And Victor and Oscar is like, but what if she asks for more? And John is like, well, I'll just tell her that I'm spoken for. And Oscar is like, have he and I met? And John is like, no, you haven't, but I'll introduce him soon enough. And hey, I'm looking forward to seeing John's boyfriend. And Oscar has made his choice. He is never going to change. He wants to marry for money, and again, it's not necessarily his fault. He has to continue to win Ryan's name, and he has to do what he has to do. And I think John understands that, and I'm glad to see that they can still continue to be friends. And talking about Oscar Wilde's gaydar, he's like, what the heck is happening between those two? And Aurora's like, well, they're very good friends. They're very old friends. And Oscar's like, I can see that. Aurora's like, what? What's up? What you getting at? And Oscar's like, you know what, dear? It's okay. The fact that you don't know makes sense considering your upbringing, and that's good. Good for you. Jack and Adelheid have this little conversation, and yeah, these two have sparks too, and I kind of would like to see them be together. And Adelheid ends up telling Jack about Miss Turner being a very, very rich lady now, with Ada helping with the donation and everything when it comes to donating clothes to the people in need. She ends up bumping into the Reverend, and the Reverend thanks her again for the chowder and the little surprise at the lunch. And he's like, well, I know that you like me, but does Agnes like me? And Ada's like, well, when it comes to Sister Agnes, it's a bit different. Like, pleasing her can be a little short of a miracle. And Reverend's like, well, it's a good thing that I'm into miracles. And then he's like, well, I remember the artist that we were talking about. He actually has an exhibition happening, so I want you to be there around 4 or 5, I think. And Ada's like, what? So he basically asks her out on a date. And I'm like, go, Ada, go. Over at Peggy's workplace, it turns out that Mr. Fortune does want her to go with him, and she is happy to go. Ada tries to get Marion to help her because she's like, are there some chores that I would run because I need to be out of the house for something? And then Marion was like, what's going on, Aunt Ada? And Ada tells her about the Reverend asking her out and everything. And Marion's like, I'm so happy for you. Of course you should go. Better yet, I'll go with you. And Ada's like, you would do that for me? And Marion's like, oh yeah, of course, let's go. Peggy comes back home to pack up more of her stuff for the trip, and this is where she ends up telling her mom about the trip to Tuskegee. And of course, her mom isn't into it. She's like, what the heck? You're going down south? That's the type of life you have never experienced, Peggy. And also, the moment you cross that line, you stop being human. And I need you to just get out of it. And Peggy's like, no, I won't. I can't back out of it. I have to do this. And this is where her mom tells her to be careful about not making any eye contact with white people. Even the slightest expression can be read wrong. She's fearing for her daughter's life, and Peggy's like, no, I have to do this because if I end up putting myself into work, it helps me distract myself from losing my child. And again, her mother understands that, but her mom is very, very afraid for her. And hey, I'm afraid for Peggy. Something better not happen to her. Bertha decides to give George a visit in his office, and she is like, well, the Duke is gonna be over here in like a week or two, and I need you to use your contacts to figure out where he's staying. And basically, Bertha wants to invite the Duke because, again, she needs the Duke, especially with Mrs. Winterton having these connections. Bertha wants to have these connections too. And George is like, wait, you want me to contact the Duke? How? Why? What's up? And Bertha's like, just do this for me, George. And George is like, okay, so if I end up doing this for you, will you forgive me? And Bertha's like, well, if you do this for me, we'll talk. We cut to the strike people with Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Henderson tells everyone about his interaction with George and how George is ready to fight and how they should be ready to fight too. Marion ends up accompanying Ada to the exhibition, and they see the Reverend there, and Marion's like, I'm just gonna walk around so you can have some alone time with him. And Ada really appreciates that, and then these two end up talking about the artist, and this is also where the Reverend is like, well, I wonder what your sister had to say about you coming here to meet me. And Ada's like, oh, you know her, she has her opinions. And I'm like, Agnes doesn't know. Agnes doesn't know that Ada is here. But yeah, these two continue talking about the artist and how he was like, what, 4'6" and everything. And yeah, it's an entire thing. And the episode just ends with these two looking at the pictures and just enjoying each other's company. And I'm like, Agnes, I'm looking forward to seeing what Agnes has to say. Let's see. But yeah, this is where the episode ends, and let me know what you thought of the episode down in the comment section below. When it comes to the next episode, I am looking forward to seeing what happens with Peggy. And yeah, as far as Dershel and Marion are concerned, I want them to be together. But yeah, let me know what you thought down in the comment section below. And until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later. Bye.